Hello world, welcome back to another episode of Three Candid Questions. And this one was so much fun. It was so much fun to dive deep with Rick on this eternal question. Why do some people experience one situation as a very bright and, expanding, probably enlightening moment? And another person experiences the same thing as a heavy and devastating moment. And this also includes one of the topics that I'm most passionate about in life, and that is the free flow. And now it does like, oh, there we are. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Sabrina. Good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Thanks for joining us on Three Candid Questions. So exciting because this is season 2 of the podcast. So
congratulations.
Yes, it's awesome. And I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. Before we jump into whatever, comes up for us, I would love for you to just introduce yourself a little to our lovely audience.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for. Where do I begin? Well, basically, I mean, you know my name. I'm I'm a coach, a life coach, if you want to call it that, because it takes on so many different labels as different clients approach. Um, but my background, which most people tend to be interested in, prior to becoming a coach, um, uh, outside of the corporate world, I was a paramedic. I was a paramedic for 30 years in a very busy center, Vancouver, British Columbia, which is, um, you know, um, the biggest city in the west coast of Canada, probably next to Toronto, as far as populations is concerned, if people want to compare the two. There's always a rivalry between the two cities, but Toronto's always been the center of Canada, so to speak. But no, I love the West Coast. I live in a very rural area. As you can see, the picture behind me, the ocean is really, really close to me.
Lovely.
Both me and my wife love the ocean, and we raised 4 children out here on Vancouver Island, and now I have 9 grandchildren because of that.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you very much. And that occupies a big part of my mind and my life, actually. But what was interesting is that I kept my island home, and I commuted on a ferry every 4 days to work in Vancouver. And and throughout that experience, I felt it was a calling to me. It wasn't something I aspired to be as a kid. It's like, what would you like to be? Oh, I'd like to be a fireman, or one of those kind of things. Paramedic it wasn't even on the radar. Until I was running a small business, and somebody came into my office. Just I don't know why, but they did, and started a conversation. And they said, "Have you ever thought about being a paramedic?" And
That's so interesting.
Yeah, I know. And I said, no. And I said, well, why are you asking me, for one thing? So the town I was living in, where I was working, had a part-time ambulance service. So it wasn't that I had to give up anything that I was doing right now. I could do this on top of. And so, and I thought, well, that's kind of interesting. And so I had a conversation with him and started to learn more about it. And I said, okay, yeah, sign me up. What do I have to do? He said, well, you got to take this training. You got to do this. You got to do that. And the first time I went out and approached a patient, even though it was a supervised session, he said, okay, here's your patient. Go for it. And I knelt down in front of the patient. I reached out, checked her pulse, and there was something at that moment that told me I was at the right place doing the right thing and never looked back in 30 years. You know, it was just sort of like I really truly took it as a calling, and I fell in love with the work. And as you know, and probably you see it in movies and you see it in your own life, we come across a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And some of it is not fun and games. A lot of it is traumatic, and a lot of it isn't. But what I noticed throughout the years was the diversity of experiences that people were having while doing the work. Not everybody was troubled by the trauma. I wasn't, but many others were. Some were really troubled by the chaos, the uncertainty, the busyness. And I had a different experience. I was really curious about that throughout my career. And then later I had an opportunity of, they were bringing in what they called a coaching attitude towards supervision. And I later worked up the ladder to be a supervisor. And so I took the opportunity to get some coaching experience and training. And there was something within that really resonated. And so when I retired, I decided I was going to work more towards understanding why there was such a diverse experience in the work, why some people are having a great time and some people were not having a good time, and what was post-traumatic stress, what are all these different things that were coming up, and to get a better grasp of it, to give back to the service the experience that I was having, at least give people the opportunity. Because like I said, in spite of everything, I considered myself to thrive. I was exhausted. I was tired. I went through all the emotions. And yeah, the service was quite different than it is today, in the sense of there's a lot of extra help for people that feel that they're not coping. That is getting better. But when I was sort of growing up in the service, it was, well, we have another call for you. Regardless of what happened prior to, there was always another call to do. And that was the nature of the work.
Yes.
But anyways, yeah, so I left a big part of me, and that was an interesting transition too, because when you're so tied to the work, you tend to get identified by the work.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then when the work is not there, you wonder, well, who am I now? What is my purpose? What, all these things that we, as coaches, we kind of delve back into, right?
Yeah.
So it's been an interesting journey, and that's probably half my life right there, because I'm not going to tell you how old I am.
Let's keep that a secret then.
That a secret. But I've always been curious about so many different things. And just, I always ask the question, like, I probably drove my parents crazy, it's like, why is that? And why does it have to be that way?
Yeah.
So anyways, yeah, hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I already have like 2 questions in my mind. So let me start with the first one, which is, sorry, I'm jumping like full force in.
No,
but the one thing is obviously about, you noticing the way people cope very differently with the experience, with the chaos, the uncertainty, the heavy emotions that are involved with the job. And others, seem to be fine, although, of course, they also feel that it's an intense activity to be a paramedic. And then you mentioned that once you started sort of your coaching journey, you explored that more. Like, why is that? And what did you find out? I'm really curious about that part.
Well, there's several things. The first thing I noticed is that my experiences were coming more from an inside out perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Because if it was an outside in other words, if the things that were happening outside of me influencing my experience, then more people would have similar experiences based on what they were seeing. Because it wouldn't matter if there were 4 different paramedics on the scene, each watching or being involved in the same scenario.
Mm-hmm.
There would be 4 different experiences.
Yeah.
And so there's a bit of a flip, because at first I always thought it was that, and I'm pointing my finger towards, that being the cause of whatever I'm experiencing. Now that experience could be upset, sadness, all the different ones, right? And we tend to focus on the negative ones more than the positive ones. We never question, why am I happy? We all, sometimes you go, oh, it's like a beautiful sunset and I must be happy because that's because there's a beautiful sunset. My partner would look at me and going, it's just a sunset. Right? So it's like, and I mean, my part, not my wife loves sunsets too, but it's like, why can't you see it the way I see it? And it's impossible. And so I started to discover a couple of things, like, so my experiences were always coming from the inside out. So my experiences were being more projected out towards what I was seeing. And that was interesting. And the other interesting part was that we all have a different perspective. And so it was really, again, interesting to learn and seek understanding of what those perspectives were. So how did you see it? And understand, like my partner would say, well, it's just a sunset. Well, what do you mean it's just a sunset? And that's where I started to get really involved in Carl Jung's work on the different temperaments and the attributes and the thinking, the extroverted, the feeler, those kind of things. Like Myers-Briggs kind of made a program around. So it was just interesting to see all these different perspectives and then relate it to, okay, so if it's an inside out experience, what could I do with that? Like what? So if that is true, and if people are having a bad experience, and if it's not the work, then what is it? And then I got involved in a gentleman's by the name of Sid Banks, who wrote a few books, and one of them was called The Missing Link, which I thought was really appropriate because that's what I was looking for. I was looking for the link between where my experiences were truly coming from. And the way he described it was that thought and feelings were 2 sides of one coin. So if I'm having a feeling, it's based on a thought. And I may not recognize that thought immediately, but I certainly recognize the feelings because we're more in touch with that, right? So that became another exploration. And okay, so as my feelings change, the outside world seemed to change along with it.
That is so true.
Right. And I often put up a little shield in front of my camera. As you can see, so it makes it cloudy, it makes it unfocused. And I noticed that when I'm in a low mood, the fog is thicker, and my field of reference is very narrow, and my choices also seem to be very narrow, to where it seems like I'm very limited. And this is what I find with people that are caught up in their post-traumatic stress and other depressions is that, when they're caught up in their low moods, they're not seeing clarity. They're not seeing what is really true out there. And so they're often focused on their feelings and thinking that there's something wrong with their feelings, something's wrong with their thinking. And that just keeps them in a hamster loop, to the point where, unfortunately, they look at life very narrowly and their choices as very narrow too. And that was really upsetting me too, was the fact that in my region, we had some of the highest rates of suicide among first responders.
Wow.
Yeah. And, when you kind of get the idea that it doesn't have to be that way, that by, I often say, you're really one thought away from being mentally well again. Because it's the thought it's that one thought that's holding you away. So what I discovered with me is that the minute I sort of let go of there's something wrong with this feeling, that I need to do something about this feeling, it has a way of releasing itself. It just flows away. And we naturally fall back into peace and contentment. And to a point where I feel that peace and contentment is a default state, because I didn't have to get there. So it was my thinking that was removing me away from that point. So if that was true, then all I needed to do was keep releasing, and noticing, and then releasing, noticing, and allowing, whatever terms you want to put it, to let the feelings and thoughts flow through, because the nature of thought is fluid.
And ever changing.
Yeah, it's ever changing. Like I often tell people, I says, if I had truly control over my thinking, wouldn't it make more sense for me to always think positive thoughts? It would. I mean, like, why would I?
Yeah.
If I truly had control over it all, why would I not think just good stuff?
Yeah. So that, I mean, from what you just said, that would mean my perspective is broadened, my opportunities are broadened, that I see. So my life turns into something more blissful, brighter, nicer, with more wealth, more healthier relationships, whatever it is that you're looking for will show up because you have a broadened perspective suddenly.
Absolutely. Like, because you dropped the veil, you've opened up the chute of water, or whatever you want to call it, right? The metaphor. And I love the idea of the water as a metaphor or a pipe, because, when you're under pressure, when water is under pressure, it's really hard and intense. But when you have a bigger pipe, it just seems to flow with ease. There's no pressure to it. But when you have a blockage, and I call that blockage a shitty thought, let's say, right? It's like, right? Because,
good one.
Right, like, it's something that doesn't sit well. Like, it comes with a crappy feeling. And when I notice that, then there's nothing I need to do about it. Like, there's nothing I don't need to add more water or do something. All I need to do is get back to where the blockage or the source is, and go, oh, there's a thought in the way. When I remove that thought, it'll start flowing again.
And let's just clarify that for anyone who's listening and saying, like, oh, but isn't that toxic positivity, so to speak? That I'm telling myself, oh, everything is always positive, because there's also a danger in that.
Oh, 100%. 100%.
So what are your thoughts on that distinction?
Well, so there's, I mean, obviously there's some positive science out there that says that, and my understanding of cognitive behavior therapy is much similar to that, right? So if it seems like if thought is the catalyst to my experiences, then having better thoughts would produce better experiences. And that's 100% true.
Yeah.
Because when I'm in a good thought or in a good feeling, the world looks wonderful. So even though the scenery is exactly the same it was 10 minutes ago, it just looks different, right? There's something, to me, magical about that. So the tendency would be, well, okay, then all you need to do is just keep replacing bad thoughts with good thoughts. That's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, so, but we do understand that you can't hold on to two thoughts, right? It's like two rocks can't occupy the same space. The law of physics says that can't happen.
Then using your image of the pipe, it's like even a double blockage suddenly if that happens.
Yeah. And plus it also gives you the notion that you must do something with your feeling.
The free flow is gone. Yeah.
So the minute that for me, again, this is my experience, and I often tell people who I'm coaching is I don't really want you to believe what I'm saying, which sounds a little counterintuitive, but I want you to try it out, like explore it for yourself. Notice when you are feeling crappy, what looks and what the world looks like, and then notice your feelings. Like, notice the shifting of your feelings. Notice that when you're not paying attention to the fact that you're sad, 2 minutes later, or not even that, you're feeling something different. So why is that? Why can you be sad one moment and mad another moment and happy another moment, and all these different feelings, right? And it doesn't seem like you're doing anything with it. Like when I go for a walk, I kind of have this expectation that I'm going to be in nature and it's going to be a wonderful experience, right?
Yeah, that would be probably depending with where you go for a walk.
Oh,
That should be the expectation.
But it's just interesting. Like I follow a trail that's close to my house pretty well every day, but the experience is different every day, even though it's the same trail.
So true.
And I'll be going along on the trail, and then all of a sudden, like out of the blue, not a wonderful feeling is coming to me. And it's sort of like, so wait a minute, why is that? Like I'm having a good time, and all of a sudden now there's other feelings coming in that's removing me away from that. I just find it curious. I find it interesting that phenomenon happens, because again, if I had full control over it, that wouldn't happen. So when I realize that I don't have control over what thoughts come into my mind, I have more control over what I keep, and what I let go. So, and it's really based on the feeling. So if I'm coming in and I'm going, oh, geez, I'm kind of feeling crappy about that right now, I can let go of that feeling, let go of the rock, let go of whatever metaphor you want to come up with, and allow something fresh and new to come through.
Yeah. And isn't that so powerful? I mean, from my experience, I absolutely resonate with what you are just describing. And the thought that just acknowledging it's really, once we we let it sink in, it's so empowering because it's a simple thing. Just acknowledge, and then it can be released.
Yeah.
Such a simple law or rule, or however you want to call it, to give you the sense of moving much quicker through the hard times, the negative feelings, and be on a brighter side, so to speak, again.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And you know, the thing is that I tell people is like you just need to know how it works. Right? So the nature of thought is like clouds. They constantly are moving and they're changing. And every once in a while something looks like a duck. So we focus on the duck, you know, or the monster.
Yeah.
Right? And but when we realize it's just clouds, that it has no real substance, then we can be more playful with it. And that's where I keep going in my exploration is to be more playful with it and use feelings as only a barometer to the kind of thinking that I'm doing, not to the kind of world that's out there.
Yes, and that's very different because then suddenly you, again, I'm using the word empowerment. You're sort of empowered because it's not an outside world where you're just sort of a victim and stuff happens to you, but you can actually, I wouldn't say control, but you can very much influence how you feel about the outside world and what your experience is in this world.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that was one of the things I didn't realize exactly what was going on at the time. But the reason why some people can thrive and some people have a bad time around, you know, being a paramedic or a first responder is the ability to let go of thought. So it's a bit of a practice, right? So it's not about positive thinking, which is again sort of trying to replace something that isn't replaceable. It wasn't designed to be replaced in a sense. And yes, you can think of positive thoughts, and so what happens when you don't think of positive thoughts, right? So there's something about that. And then the other thing is that you can't change the environment that it's happening because many people try and do, right? So if that was different, I would feel less stressful.
Yeah.
Right? So you get into that kind of argument, or right, because it really looks like an outside in experience.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the illusion. It's sort of, I forget
Yeah.
which David Bohm, I think the physicist, you know, saying, you know, thought creates it, and then says, I didn't, you know, kind of a thing. It was not me.
That's a good one. Yeah, but it's so true that it's so easy to focus on external factors as the reason as to why our life turns out a certain way, or while the world is turning out a certain way. And again, I think the really tricky bit here is that we always turn out to be victims in that scenario. And that means we cannot move forward. We cannot see the broad perspective you had mentioned earlier. It sort of paralyzes us.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. I mean, it like, and part of it is that, you know, for me, we've got this one mind that we have a tendency of using in two different ways.
Yes.
And we've experienced this. I know I know most people have, and if they reflect a little bit, they will have noticed it in their own life. A thing that we call being in a flow state or being in the zone. Lots of sports guys talk about that. You know, it's like, oh, I'm in the zone right now. In other words, I can't do anything wrong. It just seems like everything is just falling into place. And we've experienced that as paramedics too. Like, you know, like, and they're most of the time they're really high acuity, high traumatic type calls where it's very busy. There's a number of different patients and things like that. But at the end of it, when we reflect on what the heck just happened, nobody can explain it. everybody says, it's like we were just doing, like it almost feels like we were guided to do it, as opposed to something we were consciously putting forward to do. So, and the other quality that people have noticed in it is that there's no thought involved. There's not a lot of thinking involved. So our intellect, although it plays a really good, important role, there's something beyond the intellect that allows all that to happen. And much like there's something beyond the intellect that allows us to keep walking without falling over or relearning walking constantly, right?
Yeah.
In medicine, there's sympathetic nervous systems and things like that, where the heart just knows what to do. And we get this unconscious competency within our own self where enables us to drive without thinking, walk without thinking, reach out and grab something without going through a whole bunch of steps, right? And yet when we were young, there was learning, right?
Yeah.
How much, two hands, but so that all played, that was very interesting phenomenon. So if there's no thought involved, then what is in action? What is that?
What is it actually? Yes.
What is it that, right? And I've come to the term of intuition or wisdom. And from some of the research I came across, being in the zone was the ability to use both sides of our brains equally. So we have this thing of skills and knowledge that we've picked up all through our life. And then we have this thing called creativity or wisdom or intuition that has no home base. It seems to have a source of its own, an outside source. To me, it's plugged into a universal thought, like Jung calls it the universal mind kind of a thing. And I love that. But when you're in the zone, because you're not relying on your intellect, you're actually balanced. So wisdom guides you to take that one step without thinking, and it extracts what it knows that's appropriate for the moment.
Yeah, it just flows basically. It flows through you. And I have that a lot when I write, because I'm writing books, and even when I write content, I remember when I wrote my first novel, it was actually like that. 1 week I would write without pause. It was crazy. It was just pouring through me, and I would know exactly what the person in the book would say next, what the scenery would be. There would be no pause and no thinking like, oh, what's going on? Nothing. The next week, there are all these thoughts in my head and nothing was flowing through me. And coming to that acceptance, you spoke of just letting that go and not thinking, oh, this is wrong. That was also one of my big learning points there. Like, just let it flow through you when it comes, but also accept when it doesn't come.
Yeah.
Just, move on, do something else, and it will come. There will be the moment where you know exactly what to do next.
Absolutely. And a coach of mine, I've done some courses with him and been mentored, Michael Neal. He says that guidance, that flow, is 100% reliable.
It is.
It's just not predictable.
You cannot expect that it plays by human conventional rules,
right?
Or the capitalist idea of productivity or something. No, it doesn't.
No. But so when you combine the two, and I love what you talked about with the writing and things like that, because I experience the same things when I'm doing blogs and stuff. But there are times when you use feelings as a barometer, right? So I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling stuck, I'm feeling whatever it is. It's sort of like, oh, okay, maybe this isn't a good time to do that blog post, kind of a thing.
Exactly.
It's just a signal, right? It doesn't mean
Yeah.
that there's something wrong with you, but and for me, being anxious tends to creep up a little bit more than normal, or whatever normal is.
Exactly. That's very relative, right?
It's very, very relative. Um, More often than I would appreciate, but I
Mm-hmm.
appreciate the fact because it's a gauge for me. It's sort of like, oh, I'm going too fast,
Mm.
pushing too hard, and so it's my opportunity to pay attention to that, going, okay, I need to slow down right now.
Mm.
I'm probably 4 or 5 steps ahead more than I need to be, because the only thing I need to be at right now is whatever's in front of me. What is
Mm. Mm.
happen right now? And that's being back in the flow state, because that's all that flow state is. It's just doing one thing as it unfolds,
Yes.
not anticipating or thinking of, okay, if I do this, this is going to happen. This is right.
And this is how it should be. I
Oh,
I feel, you have been touching on the topic of expectations
oh yes,
a
big time.
lot. Like, what expectations do we have of the world or the situation in front of us? Wanting it to be different, maybe, so that we can feel better, or expectations of the process. Like, if I do this now, then this should happen.
Yeah,
And that's like very much being in our thought, as
yeah,
you describe it, and blocking
yeah.
that flow completely.
Because what are you relying on? Like I don't want to give intellect or our ego. Sometimes people call it the ego
Mm.
a bad name, right? Because it's there for a purpose,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
right? It for me, the ego has always been a defense mechanism, right? So it recognizes patterns of behavior, it recognizes shapes and all these different things, and its main function is to protect us.
Mm.
So if it senses danger, then it will notify us in some form or fashion. The unfortunate part is it can't tell the difference between, and I often hold up a picture of a lemon or an object that looks like a lemon.
Wow, I can't believe you have that trick. That's so cool.
And what I say to people, I says, when you look at this, what happens? And he said, well, my mouth starts to water, like even at the word lemon,
Mm.
right? And it's like, well, isn't that interesting? And
Mm-hmm.
they'll go, well, because that there's no lemon. So like it's only a picture. It's only a plastic piece. It's not even a. So how can that be? Well, because that's what the intellect does. It recognizes.
Mm.
Now, if you've never had a lemon before, you would never experience that,
Yeah.
right? But since you have, that's what's going to happen, right? It's like, oh, lemon, mouth waters, um, and you have,
Or let me add to that.
yeah, go for
You
it.
might have read about a lemon and the experience of having a lemon, and our intellect is actually able to translate that into us feeling like, oh, I know what
Yeah.
the experience of having a lemon is, which is quite mind blowing if you just think
Oh,
about it.
it's and it's the same reason why people, two people can look at two different at the same picture and have a different
Mm.
thought about it, right? Like and Young talks about perspectives and what our preferences are, right? Which is all part of our intellect. So when you talk about expectations, the expectations are only coming from our intellect and what our intellect thinks is the best thing for us,
Mm.
only based on what it knows.
Yeah,
And what it knows is a fraction of what it doesn't know.
that is true.
And so if I'm only relying on what I know, it's very limited.
Mm.
And so, if I can respect that and sort of get quiet away from, sort of like not be dismissive, but thanks for sharing, ego or intellect. I'm just going to rest here and just see what comes up, like you were talking
Mm.
about, like, get back into sort of a quieter state and have potentially no thought going on and just see what comes up. And then evaluate it at that point, which is more
Yeah.
discernment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm thinking three things here now. My
Mm.
thought is like my intellect is like, exactly. So I'm thinking of a quieter state. That's why mindfulness or meditation can be like super helpful, where you really, just practice letting everything flow through you.
Yes. Yeah.
The other thing that I was thinking about was really in terms of, oh, now I've lost my thought.
How can that be?
How can that be? Well, let's just pause it there. It will come back. I'm letting it flow through me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was
Yeah.
thinking of that, so
Yeah.
it was like, no. Oh yeah, now I have it again. There it goes. So the thing you mentioned about only what we know, it also means that experience we have had, especially as young people, children or young adults, teenagers, they really shape what our intellect tells us. So when we have been conditioned in a certain way, it might be even coming from a toxic or traumatic background or whatever it is, of course, it will keep showing up later on. And when we don't realize that that's a limited experience and we can actually broaden how we view the world,
Mm-hmm.
then we get also very trapped in those thoughts. That was coming to me as I was listening to what you were saying.
There's a Spanish poem. I can't remember the actual title of the poem, but I I heard it watching a Christmas show a couple of years ago. The show was called Four Christmases.
Mm.
And what was interesting about the show was it was about four daughters, and of course I had four daughters, and right away it's like, oh, I got to watch this. It's about four daughters. But it started off, and it's a Spanish production, but it was dubbed English
Mm.
quite well. But it started off with the poem, and the first line of the poem is, "As children." Now I'm gonna lose the thought now. As children, we experience life once.
Mm.
Then the rest is memory.
Oh, that's always a bit intense, because it sounds like, whoa, we are sort of trapped in whatever happens to us as children. But of course, we can change that. Later, as adults, we realize that, what we just spoke about can influence how we.
When you understand how that
Yeah.
works.
Yeah.
But there's a good news and a bad news story to that side of things,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because the good news is we don't have to keep relearning things.
Mm.
So, when I see a tree, I don't have to go, what the heck is that in front of me? Kind of a thing.
Yeah.
So it's like the lemon. Like the first time I experienced a lemon, it's sort of like I can never experience that first time lemon again.
Mm.
And as far one of my little experiments that I love to run for myself is the notion of having a first time experience every time.
Mm.
And the only way that I can think of doing that is letting go of the memory of. So when we order a dish that we from a new restaurant, let's say, and we're experiencing it for the first time, when we go back to that restaurant and order that same meal again, we're actually comparing it to the memory that we have.
Yes.
We just naturally do that.
Yeah.
It's just something that, right? So expectation now, because it's memory based, we're expecting it to taste just as good as that first time experience. and then it doesn't.
It might not.
Well, it might not, right? I mean, it obviously depends on your mindset or mind frame.
Mm,
Because if you hold on to that expectation, then you are tasting a memory. You're not tasting, and that plate of whatever it is, let's say spaghetti, that's not the same spaghetti that you ate 2 weeks ago.
no, it might even be a different chef at the same restaurant who
Right,
cooks with a different style, you know?
right. All those different things. But we're living the memory of
Mm,
the spaghetti, even though, because it says that's the same spaghetti I ordered 2 weeks ago. Right? But it's fresh and new. It's fresh
yeah.
and new. So for me, there's always been this opportunity to experience something fresh and new
Mm.
every time.
Again, when you just let go of
Right.
any. Mm. I love that. And it takes me to the third thought I had previously that got lost. You know, you just mentioned a very self sufficient and independent way of broadening your perspective by just letting go of your memory and then of your expectation of that experience you're living. Another thought that I had was like, that's why it's so important for us to connect with people because they can also show us different ways of viewing something or different ways of thinking or you know if we have been conditioned in a certain way and our intellect or ego however we want to call it keeps telling us no, you know, this is unhealthy, you should look at it this way or go that direction, and then someone comes along and says like, oh no, but you know, I've been doing it like this all along, and your intellect is like, oh, maybe I can, you know, start changing my point of view. So that would be another way of how we can change what our intellect believes is right for us or not right for us.
Yeah. Um, can I share a few things about that?
Yes, absolutely.
I guess that's part of the show, isn't it?
Please bring it on.
No. Um, yes, and we touched on that earlier around. I love to hear what you see
Mm,
because there's absolutely no way that I can see it the same way you can,
yeah.
um, or have the same experience. You know, that's the uniqueness of us. And when we honor the uniqueness between us, then there's no right or wrong.
Mm,
And for me, when I see that we're not honoring the uniqueness of the experience that somebody's having, going, well, you should have a different experience. We're all of a sudden going into the right or wrong mode. And if I take a stand, the other stand's going to be taken. Well, what's wrong with my experience?
mm,
You know, it's like, well, I have the right experience. You should, you know, and we've gotten trapped in that in the paramedic first responder world. You know, like get over it. I got over it. You should be able to get over it,
yeah.
right? Like, and we think that the policy is wrapped around one individual who thinks that's the way it should be. So, I mean, we can take that to the next level, and we basically says, you know, can start wars over it,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? You know, so when the minute we get into the right or wrong, us and them, then that's ego, right? And the ego's sole role is to survive. And the only way it can survive is to be right, because there's no function if it's wrong. You know, it's like, you know, I'm here to protect you. I have to be right.
Mm,
You know, don't don't touch that stove. Well, it's not hot, but still, don't touch that stove.
mm,
Um, so I like that aspect of it, and for me, you know, the play for me is it's interesting that our eyes are forward. I mean, if God was to design the perfect human, you would think we would have eyes behind us, and if that was the whole idea. But it's interesting that I cannot see my own face. I can only experience myself through the reflection of others, or something being reflected back to. And even then, I'm not even clear if that's my real face.
Yeah,
because
that is true.
it's my experience of it, right? It's like,
Yeah.
um, so it's, that part's kind of funny in that way. But we are unique, and yes, I can learn from that perspective. But the other half of that is that I believe that we have an internal guide inside that knows exactly what's right for us in the moment. Now that's the key, in the moment, because our intellect will love to anticipate what's good for you tomorrow, the next day, kind of a
A
thing.
sense of security, yes.
Sense of security, right? And it will get trapped in soliciting opinions and advice and dialogue from others. I want to start a radio show, let's say.
How come you use that example, Rick?
No, I don't know. It just kind of came up. Because it's a great example, because it's something that I've often was thinking about when I was younger, about, geez, it'd be really cool to be a radio host, right?
Absolutely. Love it.
I love it. I love the other thing is I wanted to be sort of like, when I was growing up, there was a guy by the name of Johnny Carson, the Tonight Show, those kind of things. He would bring in interesting people and talk to them about it, and and I thought, geez, what a cool job that is to have people come in and you just make them shine, kind of thing. Anyways, long story short, so we get a seed of an idea. A lot of these ideas, these seeds, come from out of the blue. We're in a very relaxed state. It's sort of like, we've asked, oh, geez, I want to do something different, kind of a thing. And then in the shower, or wherever, on a walk someplace, or driving mindlessly, out of the blue, it's just sort of like, yeah, that would. And then there's another thought that's added to it, right? And it all feels good. All feels right. And then there's something that creeps in.
Who might that be?
Doesn't feel quite right, right? And so we've got this intellectual thought coming through,
Yes.
that, well, everybody's done that before. What makes you different? You've started many things and never finished them. Kind of
all these kind of thoughts, yeah.
All rambling through memory. Well, maybe you should get more opinions, right? So we seek the advice of others, which is good, but you have to take everything as a grain of salt, because the advice that people give, or the books that you read about it, are all based on who? That point of view, all that life experience that's behind that person. Well, yeah. We're unique. We're different.
I think that's very powerful. And I want to say something just briefly to that, because what I was imagining was like, these kind of moments when suddenly someone shows up and out of the blue just says something that feels exactly like that thought you might get on your own, like your story with the paramedic. Someone walks in and tells you, have you ever thought of being a paramedic? And that really shaped your life.
Gotcha.
And I think those are the powerful moments, connecting to someone else, when, for whatever reason, maybe it's the universal mind you were speaking about earlier, where something is just brought to us that, somehow we know is right for us. And when we learn to listen,
and learn to ask the right question. So if I had gone to that same individual
Yes.
and said to him, I'm really lost right now. What do you think I should be doing?
Mm.
I didn't ask him.
Yeah.
I was looking, somewhere in a formless form, right? So the question was going out, and there's a guy by the name of Jordan Peterson who he's a lot of it is theology and points to different kinds of religions and things like that. But one of the things I like in the Bible is it sort of says, ask and you shall receive. And I like that notion because, okay, so if I ask for something, in other words, I'm looking for some kind of direction. Now, immediately, my intellect might take over and go, well, let's think about this for a second. let's come up with some options, right? Let's just come up with some, right? And so we make a list of all the different things that we could do. We do this thing called an ikigai and try and analyze what the world needs and what we can do and what we can get paid for. We do this really nice intellectual exercise. And then we go for a walk.
I love it.
Right? And we just sort of let go of everything that we were planning. And we come across this guy out of the blue, and he's basically going, we're really looking for paramedics. Have you ever thought of being a paramedic? Wait a minute. It's not on my list.
Exactly. And that's the tricky bit. I totally agree with you. Like, when that is just presented to us in a free flow, not intellectual moment, let me put it that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Then that might be a real door opening there. And it's absolutely right, because it gives us the growth that we need in that moment, or whatever else it is,
Yeah. So I just wanted to add to that.
Yes.
Add to that briefly is, if we're going to ask the question, we need to be prepared for the answer. And part of that being prepared is being open to the fact that it may not be what you're looking for, what you think you're looking for.
Yeah.
Because it can often show up in different ways. And in this case, it showed up in a really unplanned way. But I said yes. And that was part of my preparedness. Was I didn't do a lot of thinking about it, analyzing, because there was a lot of circumstances I could have gotten involved in my life that would have pointed me that wasn't the right thing to do. And so I took that analysis away and was driven more by the feeling that I was, looking at towards that. And then it's sort of like that, the idea that time has come, it just seems like the steps just started to unfold in front of me.
Yes.
So it became more like a flow than something that I was planning on doing, if that makes any particular sense.
For me, absolutely. I resonate with it because I've experienced the same things.
Yeah, great.
The moment something is just presented to me out of the blue, someone just makes a statement, and for some reason, but also because I'm prepared to listen to those kind of statements, it resonates with my entire being. And it's almost like a seed has been planted, like, yeah, that's it. That's the next step. That's the next, direction I want to take, or that's the solution for what I've been looking for. Sometimes when we feel stuck. So that's quite magical when that happens.
100%. It feels magical, doesn't it? It feels,
yes.
Yeah. And it always comes with a beautiful feeling.
And there we are again, that at the beginning of our conversation, that it's all about the feeling, like how we are we able to let it all flow through us and experience the beautiful feelings that come our way, even in the smallest moments? Or are we blocking it with our thinking.
Our stinking thinking.
We are not telling people here,
No.
please, audience, don't misunderstand us.
I mean, thinking is there's a fundamental difference though. There's thinking with a small t, which is going through that stuff, and understanding that 1 + 1 = 2, and when it says push, you don't pull a door open. Although I don't know how many times I've read the sign. I have, I don't know what kind of car you drive, but I have a car that has a fob for turning or opening the door and not opening the door, right? And I caught myself at my front door of my house clicking this fob trying to open up the door and couldn't understand why the door wasn't unlocking.
Oh no.
Because the small t was in the way, because I had a busy day and I was in my mind and not in my life.
Yes.
I didn't notice what I was doing, and we often catch ourselves that way, right? So that's the discernment piece. That's, to me, that I don't think either one of us is condoning thinking.
No.
But we're being mindful about what we're thinking about.
And how we think, like present in that moment. I think that's very powerful what you just said, like being there in front of the door and realizing, okay, now I'm going to press the
Battery must be dead.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Rick, I'm going to end this conversation here because it's just a beautiful round whole thing. Thank you so much for making the time.
No, many laughs. Thank you very much for the experience.
Whew, this was a deep one. So much fun for me, and I hope you enjoyed it too. What did you take away? Just take a moment to stop and reflect. What were your thoughts? What were your emotions as we were talking, as you were listening to the different points that Rick had to share about the inside-out perspective? And now get ready for another insightful conversation in our next episode, where it's about business, about growth, about expansion, and about vision. Stay tuned and be excited.